My name is Eric Harmon, and I did my research term paper over the 18th Amendment and saying that the 18th Amendment was the biggest mistake our government ever made. The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture, the sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors in the United States and was ratified in 1919. The biggest reason it was so terrible is it did nothing good for our country. It boosted crime rates. It didn't really have a big effect on the manufacture, the distribution of the alcohol in itself. People were still getting things through, and the reason it's also the biggest mistake is because it was repealed about 14 years later in 1933. I'm going to talk about the reason it didn't have a big impact on buying, selling, and consumption of alcohol. Originally it was developed as a social experiment to see how it could affect this and if it could make things better, because it was like a non-Christian sort of thing. The nationwide ban on sale, transportation, and manufacturing of alcoholic beverages was capping off years of effort from temperance reformers who deemed it a nationwide curse for social illnesses. These reformers were under the impression that many of the social problems throughout America was ultimately caused by intoxicating liquors. What they didn't take into account with making these assumptions was that the real cause of these illnesses were poverty, insanity, and things of that nature, and due to the fact that these people were dealing with this, it made them turn to alcohol as a way to solve their problems, and therefore alcohol was causing it to get worse, and these temperance movement people were seeing it as the alcohol was being the main cause of it, not the things behind the reason for starting to drink the alcohol. Many Americans were concerned with the negative and abusive effect caused by alcohols in the 1800s, so that was also a big push towards the prohibition and ultimately the 18th Amendment. Those who were opposed to this began to form temperance movements, which became powerful in the 1800s and really pushed to show Americans how bad the alcohol was, to try to get into place a prohibition, which they did get into case. They had become such a powerful political force that they began campaigning at all levels for the national liquor abstinence, and eventually obviously got through because the 18th Amendment was put into place. A big problem caused by the 18th Amendment was the crime rates. Like I said earlier, the crime rates shot out of the roof tremendously. Alcohol was being sold illegally, purchased illegally. There were bootleggers. People were making alcohol in their barns and their cellars and things of that nature, and then distributing it to people, basically like on a black market sort of thing, and people were buying it and still consuming it, and it really didn't stop anything. It just made it illegal. There's the movie with I don't know. Bootlegging is the process of selling or transporting illegal liquors, and these people are bootleggers, like I said before. Al Capone was a big person in bootlegging because he was in Chicago, and it was a center point for prohibition, and there was a lot of gangs at this time, and then these gangs took this alcohol and made huge profits on it, and then they started fighting each other, and it was a down spiral into terrible things, and law enforcement really had no way of stopping these gangs because they were too powerful. They had automatic weapons, they had money, they had power, they had people. I mean, these guys were rough and tough, and the law enforcement really couldn't do anything to stop it. And big thing that happened was in Valentine's Day 1929 when Capone met up to get a load of cheap whiskey, and then there was an opposing gang that also showed up, and they opened fire on each other's, and all in all, numerous people were injured and numerous people were killed. It was known as a very bloody Valentine. The 18th Amendment, all in all, had failed very badly, and the government had to drastically fix the problems they created with passing this amendment and making it a constitutional amendment. In response to this, they came up with the 21st Amendment, which would end the ban on liquor being illegal, and it was proposed by Congress in 1933, then ratified later that year, a few months later, and each state, excluding South Carolina, was in support of the repeal, so it was carried out. South Carolina is the only state that didn't agree with it. There was 3 different sections in the 21st Amendment. The first repealed the 18th Amendment, and then the second gave states control over the buying and the selling of alcoholic beverages, but in a lot of cases the states didn't lift that ban until the amendment was passed. For example, Mississippi waited 14 years to lift the ban, and Arkansas bars were not allowed to sell alcohol until 1987. The third section was put in to describe the process it took to ratify the amendment, and also the steps it would take to repeal it if necessary. Now states are able to have the counties carry out the different liquor laws put in place, and the license and the vending, and so on and so forth. The biggest opposition to the 21st Amendment was people believed it gave too much power back to the government, and people thought it was taking away their rights of free speech and other rights similarly granted by the First Amendment. And to combat this problem, the government put the power on alcohol to the states, and that created things like the drinking age was 21. The content of alcohol in, say, like beer was regulated and decided by the states. Like, for example, Colorado has a lower percentage of alcohol in their beers than, say, we do here in Missouri. And the biggest reason the 18th Amendment was a bad idea was because the cons so much outweighed the pros. The only true positive that came out of the amendment was it had a good effect on those areas where populations were really big, really small, I mean, and not in big cities, because there was less people, therefore there was less ways of getting it, less ways of producing it, and things of that nature. And then negatives were the general public just had to be more sneaky about getting their alcohol, and it made them do illegal things. Crime rates were up. Gangs got extremely powerful and very rich very quickly. And another real big negative was that it wasted billions of dollars, and then when the Depression hit in the late 20s, the government had little money to stay alive because they had already spent so much money over here on this prohibition that they could have used that money a lot during the Depression. Nothing good came from it, as I said. Crime rates were boosted, alcohol still was getting out, being produced and consumed, and I really think that the government should have really sat down, weighed out the odds, looked at the pros, looked at the cons, see what's going to happen if they really do put this in place, rather than they just kind of, it seemed like they just kind of jumped right into it and didn't really put a lot of thought into how it was going to affect the public, how it was going to affect the government, how much money it was going to take, and if it was really going to be successful. But a positive that could come from this is if they use this as an example in the future, if they're trying to make more amendments to see, like, they can use this and be like, well, we kind of rushed into this, made a rushed decision, and then come over here, be like, well, this is what we didn't think out, so we need to think this, and this before we actually jump right in and make an amendment to make such a drastic change on something like that. And so that could be a positive you could take away from it. I mean, learn from the past, I guess. And that is really all I have about the 18th Amendment being one of the biggest mistakes our government's ever made. Thank you.